The day I found out my son had sold my house without even asking me, I didn't scream, I didn't fight. I just sat there in silence. He thought I was weak, too old to stand up for myself. But what he didn't know was that I had already spoken to a lawyer. And when the call came, everything changed. People say a house is just wood and bricks, but they've never lived in mine. This wasn't just a building. It was my life, my history, my heart. It was the porch where my wife Linda used to sit every evening, humming her favorite hymn as the sun melted into the horizon. Sometimes she'd call out, "Honey, don't forget to water the roses." And I'd pretend to groan, but secretly I loved it. It was the kitchen where my son Michael would sneak cookies when he thought I wasn't looking. I can still hear the little shuffle of his socks on the tile, the creak of the cookie jar lid, and that guilty little "sorry, Dad" when I caught him red-handed. It was the backyard with the old oak tree, the one we tied a rope swing to. Michael would fly through the air, laughing so hard that Linda would clap her hands just to hear the sound. Every corner of that house held a memory. The faded paint on the banister from the time Michael carved his initials. The dent in the living room wall from when we moved in the old piano. Even the smell, that mix of pine wood floors and Linda's lavender candles. When she passed, that house became my last piece of her. I kept everything the same. Her rocking chair stayed by the window. Her favorite mug stayed on the shelf. I even watered the flowers she planted, even though my knees ached. At night, I'd sit in her chair, staring out the window, listening to the creak of the wood. Sometimes I'd whisper, "I'm still here, Linda. I'll keep this place safe." That house was more than shelter. It was my promise to her, and I thought Michael understood that, but lately, I wasn't so sure. It was a Saturday afternoon when Michael came by. I had just set a pot of chili on the stove, the same recipe Linda used to make, and the smell filled the kitchen. Michael sat across from me at the table, tapping his fingers against his phone. He hardly looked up anymore, not unless he needed something. Finally, he put the phone down and leaned back in his chair. "Dad," he said almost too casually, "don't you think this place is a little big for you now?" I glanced up from my bowl. "Big? Michael, I've lived here for 40 years.
It's home."
Why would I leave? He sighed, running a hand through his hair the way he used to when he was frustrated as a kid. But this wasn't teenage frustration. This was something colder. "Come on, Dad, you don't need all these rooms. Half the house is empty. Wouldn't it be easier to move into a condo? Less yard work, no maintenance, no headaches." I chuckled nervously, trying to lighten the mood. "A condo? Son, I like the yard work. Keeps me moving. Besides, your mom planted those roses out front. I'm not leaving them behind." Michael rolled his eyes like I'd just said something ridiculous. "You're making it harder on yourself. And honestly, Dad, it doesn't make sense for you to hold on to this place. It's wasted space, wasted space." The word stung. Was that what he thought of our home? Just square footage? I forced a smile and stirred my chili, but my appetite was gone. Inside, a little voice whispered something I didn't want to believe. "He's not saying this for me. He's saying this for himself." For the first time, I looked across that kitchen table and felt a chill. My son's eyes weren't full of care. They were full of calculations. It was early morning, the kind of morning where the house is so quiet you can hear the clock ticking in the hallway. I was in the kitchen making coffee, the smell of fresh grounds filling the air. That's when I heard Michael's voice. He was in the hallway, talking low, sharp, the way people do when they don't want to be overheard. I froze, mug in hand, listening. Yeah, don't worry," he said into his phone. "I'll handle the paperwork. My dad won't put up a fight. He'll sign whatever I put in front of him." My chest tightened. I held my breath, straining to hear. Michael's tone grew even colder. "Once it's done, the house will be ready. Just make sure the transfer goes through fast. I don't want him second-guessing." The mug trembled in my hands. He was talking about my house, my home, as if it already belonged to someone else. I set the mug down carefully, my fingers numb. A part of me wanted to storm down that hallway, grab the phone from his hand and demand answers. But I didn't move. Instead, I listened. And the more I heard, the clearer it became. Michael wasn't helping me. He wasn't concerned about me. He was making plans. Plans without me. When he hung up, I quickly stepped back, pretending to busy myself at the counter. He walked into the kitchen a minute later, smiling casually like nothing had happened. "Morning, Dad," he said, opening the fridge, grabbing a soda like he owned the place. I forced a smile, my heart pounding so loud I thought he might hear it. "Morning," I muttered, but inside one thought echoed like thunder. My son is planning to take my house, and he thinks I'm too blind to notice. A few days later, the mail arrived like it always did, a small stack of envelopes shoved through the slot. Normally, it was nothing more than bills, catalogs, maybe a coupon booklet I never used, but that day one envelope stood out. Thick paper, official seal, my name printed in bold letters. I carried it to the kitchen table, sat down, and carefully tore it open. My hands were steady at first, but the moment I unfolded the papers inside, they started to shake. It wasn't a bill. It wasn't junk mail. It was a notice of sale. My heart stopped. The words blurred together as I read them over and over. Property transfer of ownership. The address was mine. My house, my home. And there, at the bottom of the page, were two signatures. One was mine, except it wasn't. The strokes were clumsy, uneven, not the way I'd signed my name for decades. The other signature was Michael's, clear as day. I dropped the paper onto the table, my chest tightening. My son, my own flesh and blood, had forged my name. He had sold my house without even telling me. I pressed my palms against the table, trying to catch my breath. A memory flashed in my mind, Linda, standing in the garden, smiling at me. And I thought, I promised you I'd keep this place safe. And now I failed. The room spun. My hands curled into fists. For the first time, I wasn't just suspicious. I knew the truth. Michael hadn't just pressured me. He had betrayed me. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table with the papers spread out in front of me. I didn't even touch my dinner. My appetite was gone. When Michael finally walked in, whistling like he didn't have a care in the world, I called his name. My voice cracked, but I steadied it. "Michael," I said, sliding the papers toward him, "what is this?" He glanced down, and for the smallest moment, I thought I saw a flicker of guilt. But then he smirked. A smirk, "Oh, that?" he said casually, as if we were talking about the weather. "It's nothing, Dad, just some paperwork." "Don't worry about it," my hands trembled. "Don't worry about it? This says my house has been sold."
My house, Michael!
"You forged my name." He leaned back in the chair, arms crossed, cool as ice. "Dad, come on. You don't need that house anymore. You're living in the past. It's too much for you to handle. You should be thanking me. I did the hard part." "Thanking you?" My voice rose, cracking under the weight of disbelief. "You stole from me. From your own father. From your mother's memory." But Michael didn't flinch. His jaw tightened, his eyes cold. "Dad, listen. You should be grateful I handled it. Now you don't have to worry about bills, taxes, repairs. You're free. Free." That word cut deeper than any knife. I stared at him, my chest aching, searching for the boy I once knew. The boy who swung from the rope in the backyard, who begged for cookies in the kitchen. But that boy was gone. In his place was a man I barely recognized, and as he sat there smirking, telling me I should be grateful, I realized something. Michael didn't see me as his father anymore. He saw me as an obstacle, and obstacles he thought he could just remove. That night after Michael left, I sat alone at the kitchen table. The house was silent except for the ticking of the old clock on the wall. The papers still lay in front of me, the proof of his betrayal staring me in the face. I wanted to rip them apart, to scream, to march straight to his house and demand my home back, but I didn't. Instead, I sat there with my fists clenched, my jaw tight, my eyes burning. I thought of Linda. I thought of her soft hands planting roses in the front yard, her laughter echoing down the hallway. And I thought of the promise I made to her. I'll keep this place safe. Now my own son had ripped that promise from me. The anger inside me wasn't the kind that bursts like fire. No, this was different. It was quiet, cold, heavy. I whispered to myself, if I rush this, I'll lose everything. He wants me angry. He wants me careless. But I won't give him that. So I made a decision. I wouldn't fight him with shouting matches or slammed doors. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing me crumble. I would wait, patiently, quietly, because if Michael thought he had won, he was dead wrong. The next morning I woke up with the papers still on the table. I hadn't slept much. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Michael's smirk, heard his voice telling me I should be grateful. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat down, determined to read every line of those documents. If Michael thought I was too old to understand, too blind to notice, he didn't know me at all. At first, everything looked official: stamps, signatures, notarizations. But then something caught my eye. The notary seal, it was smudged. Half of the date was blurred, like someone had rushed it. I leaned closer, tracing my finger over the ink. My real signature had always been steady, practiced. But this one, it wobbled. The letters leaned too far. The curve of the A was off. I felt my chest tighten, but not with fear this time. With certainty, Michael hadn't just betrayed me. He'd been sloppy about it. I flipped through the rest of the papers, my eyes narrowing. The date on one page didn't match the date on another. The witness signature was missing on a line where it should have been. Piece by piece, I began to see it. This wasn't airtight. This wasn't unbreakable. It was a house of cards, and if I pushed in the right spot, it would all come crashing down. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. I didn't waste another day. The next morning, I put the papers into a folder, tucked it under my arm, and drove downtown. The lawyer's office was quiet, the kind of place that smelled faintly of old books and polished wood. The receptionist gave me a polite smile and said, "She'll be with you in just a moment." A few minutes later, Sarah, my lawyer, stepped out from her office. She was sharp, confident, and young enough to be my daughter, but I trusted her. She'd handled some small estate work for me after Linda passed. "Mr. Davis," she said warmly, shaking my hand, "what brings you in today?" I followed her into her office, sat down, and slid the folder across her desk. My voice was low. "I need you to look at these. Tell me if what I think happened really happened." She adjusted her glasses, unfolded the papers, and began reading. At first her expression was neutral, professional, but then her brow furrowed. She flipped a page, frowned, tapped her pen against the margin. Finally she looked up at me, eyes wide. "Who signed these for you?" I swallowed hard. "Not me." She leaned back in her chair, exhaling sharply. "Mr. Davis, this is fraud. The notary seal is invalid, the dates don't line up, and that signature, it's not yours. Whoever did this didn't just make a mistake. They broke the law." The room went silent. For a moment, all I could hear was the hum of her desk lamp, and then Sarah leaned forward, her voice steady but firm. "Do you know who's behind this?" I stared down at my hands. The answer was bitter on my tongue. "Yes, my son." Sarah didn't flinch. She didn't give me pity, didn't offer me empty words. She just nodded, picked up her pen, and said, "Then let's make this right." For the first time in weeks, I felt a surge of strength. I wasn't alone anymore, and Michael had no idea what was coming. Sarah closed the folder and tapped it lightly against her desk, her mind already working faster than mine. "Here's the thing. Mr. Davis," she said, her tone sharp but calm, "we could go to the police right now. We could file charges. But if we do that too soon, your son will panic. He'll cover his tracks, maybe even destroy evidence." I nodded slowly. "So what do we do?" She leaned forward, lowering her voice as if Michael could hear us from across town. "We stay quiet for now. Let him think he's won. People like him, they get arrogant. They get sloppy. And when he makes his next move, we'll be ready." Her words sank in deep. Stay quiet. Let him think he's ahead. It wasn't easy. Every bone in my body wanted to confront Michael, to shout, to demand he undo what he'd done. But Sarah was right. If I showed my hand too soon, I'd lose everything. So I left her office with a new kind of silence. Not the silence of defeat, but the silence of strategy. That evening, when Michael called to check on me, his voice so fake it made my skin crawl, I played along. "Doing fine, son. Just keeping busy," I told him, my voice steady, almost cheerful. He chuckled, completely unaware. "Good to hear, Dad. Don't worry, everything's under control." Under control. Those words nearly made me laugh, because for the first time since this nightmare began, it wasn't Michael who was in control anymore. It was me. Over the next few weeks, Michael grew bolder. At first, it was little things. He'd stop by the house less and less, but when he did, he walked around like he already owned the place. He'd open the fridge without asking, lean back in the living room recliner, his shoes still on, and say things like, "Man, I can't wait until this place is finally off your shoulders, Dad." I'd smile politely. pretending not to notice the way he said your shoulders instead of our home. Then came the bigger signs. One Sunday he pulled into the driveway with his wife, Jessica, and gave her a little tour of the backyard. I heard him through the window pointing at the oak tree. Once the remodel's done, that's coming down. I want space for a pool. A pool. In the yard where his mother once planted tulips, Jessica clapped her hands like a child at Christmas. Oh, Michael, it's perfect. I gripped the curtain tighter, my knuckles white. They thought they were standing in their yard planning their future, but the house wasn't his. Not legally, not truly, and every arrogant word that came out of his mouth was another weapon I'd use against him. A week later, I saw him in town bragging to a friend outside the hardware store. I wasn't close enough to hear every word, but I caught enough. Yeah, my old man finally let go of that big house. Took some convincing, but he came around. I'll flip it, maybe make 6 figures on the sale. It's all about knowing when to push, you know? His friend laughed, clapping him on the back. Michael laughed too, proud as ever. I stood across the street, my hands in my pockets, watching him. He thought he'd won. He thought I was weak, and in that moment I realized something. The louder he bragged, the easier it would be to bring him down. Every few days, I drove downtown with a fresh stack of papers for Sarah, bank statements, old property deeds, even old checks with my signature, proof of what it really looked like. Sarah studied everything with sharp eyes, her pen tapping against the desk as she worked. One afternoon, after going through the forged sale documents again, she looked up at me and smiled. Not the polite kind of smile, but the kind that said she'd found a crack in the armor. Mr. Davis, she said, sliding the papers back toward me. Your son didn't just cut corners. He left a trail a mile wide. The forged signature doesn't match. The notary stamp isn't valid. And worst of all, the witness who supposedly signed this document? He doesn't even exist. I checked. My eyebrows rose. Doesn't exist? She nodded firmly. The name is fake, which means the whole thing is a fraud, and any judge will see that. All we need to do is time this right. I leaned forward. What do you mean? Her eyes sharpened. If we expose this now, he might scramble, sell fast, maybe even take off with the money. But if we wait until he's in the middle of his deal, when he's overconfident, we can hit him with everything at once. Not only will the sale fall through, but he'll face charges for fraud and forgery. I sat back in my chair, the weight on my chest lifting just a little. For the first time since this nightmare began, I wasn't just hoping for justice. I could see it. Michael blindsided, his smirk wiped clean, his arrogance collapsing in front of everyone. Sarah gathered the papers into a neat stack, her voice calm but firm. We're not just going to stop him, Mr. Davis. We're going to make sure he never tries this again. I nodded slowly, my hands steady now. For weeks, I'd felt like I was drowning. But sitting across from Sarah, watching her prepare the trap, I realized I wasn't drowning anymore. I was waiting for the perfect wave to crash down on Michael's head. After weeks of secret meetings and quiet planning, my days settled into a strange routine. On the outside, I acted like nothing had changed. I tended the roses. I watched old game shows in the afternoon. I nodded politely when neighbors stopped to chat. Inside, I was counting down. People who saw me around the neighborhood smiled and said things like, "Good to see you out, Mr. Davis. You look well." I smiled back and said the usual, keeping busy, while my mind kept replaying Sarah's last words. Wait for his next move. Michael, of course, didn't slow down. He started ordering contractors, changing light fixtures, talking about the new kitchen, little details that made my stomach twist. Every new box of tile or bag of cement left on the porch felt like a fist in my chest. He walked the rooms with Jessica, pointing at corners he wanted to change, mapping out where the pool would go. They spoke like owners. They laughed like owners. To anyone watching, it looked like they had already won. And yet I kept my voice low when he called. When he asked if I wanted to come over for dinner, I said yes. When he offered to take me to a movie, I accepted. I showed up at his barbecues. I clapped at his jokes. I let him pour another beer for himself while I sipped water. I let him see me as harmless, smiling, tired, and old neighbors started to whisper. Mrs. Collins from next door said, "Finally, Michael did the right thing. Henry, he's got plans for that place." I nodded. I listened. Every small talk, every pat on the back, I hoarded like fuel for the moment we had planned. Sarah kept me updated in the quiet hours. "He started the remodeling contracts," she said over the phone. "He's already paid a deposit. He's overconfident. We have the timing we need." Her voice was calm, and it made me feel steady too. There was one evening I will never forget. Michael had some friends over, the kind who leave empty beer cans and loud laughter tracing the night. I sat in the car across the street for a while, just listening. He bragged about how quickly he'd flipped properties before, how savvy he was. His friend told him he was lucky to have a father who'd finally let go. Michael laughed that laugh I'd heard in town, the one that made my skin crawl. As I sat there, I repeated the plan in my head like a prayer. Wait. Let him go deeper. Let him make the next move. Don't blink. Don't warn him. Because the next move, the one Sarah said would be the final move, was scheduled for tomorrow. He was going to sign the final closing papers with the buyer, and when he did, he wouldn't expect what came next. The morning of the closing arrived crisp and cold. I woke up before sunrise, unable to sleep. My hands shook as I buttoned my shirt, but it wasn't fear this time. It was anticipation. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I had first read those forged papers weeks ago. Only now the papers were back in Sarah's hands, neatly prepared, weaponized with every flaw highlighted and every fraudulent detail underlined. When Sarah called, her voice was calm, steady. "Today's the day, Mr. Davis. He'll be at the buyer's office by 2 o'clock. I'll be there waiting. You don't have to speak if you don't want to. I'll handle everything." But I wanted to be there. I needed to see it. Around noon, Michael swung by the house, grinning ear to ear, dressed sharp in a suit he rarely wore. He adjusted his tie in the hallway mirror, smirking. "Big day, Dad," he said, clapping me on the shoulder like I was his business partner, not his father. "You'll thank me someday. You'll see." I forced a smile. My jaw ached from holding it in place. "Of course, son. I'm glad you've got it handled." He didn't notice the bitterness hiding beneath my words. Why would he? In his mind, he had already won. At 1:30, I followed him to the downtown office where the closing was set. The building was glass and steel, a modern fortress where deals were made and fortunes shifted. Inside, the conference room was polished to perfection, leather chairs, a long mahogany table, a view of the city skyline that made everything feel small. The buyer was already seated, a man in his 50s with a sharp suit and a sharper stare. His briefcase rested by his chair, and he nodded politely when I walked in. Michael strutted into the room like he owned the world. He shook the buyer's hand firmly, laughing as if this was already a done deal. He didn't even glance at me. I sat quietly at the end of the table, my hands folded in my lap, my face calm. But inside, my heart beat like a drum, because Michael had no idea that in just a few minutes, his entire scheme, his pride, his arrogance, his lies, would come crashing down around him. The papers were spread neatly across the table, the buyer ready to sign, the pen already in Michael's hand. He cleared his throat, grinning. "All right, let's make this official," he said, sliding the first page toward the buyer. That's when Sarah's voice cut through the room like a knife. "Actually, there's a problem." Michael froze, the smile slipping just slightly. He looked up, confused. "Problem? What do you mean?" "Everything's in order." Sarah reached into her folder, pulling out copies of the same documents, but these were marked, highlighted, and annotated in bold red ink. She laid them flat on the table one by one, her tone calm but sharp. Mr. Davis's signature, forged. The notary stamp, invalid. The dates, don't match. And this supposed witness here? She tapped the page. Doesn't exist, which makes this entire transfer fraudulent. The room went dead silent. Michael blinked rapidly, his face draining of color. That's ridiculous. My dad, he signed those. Isn't that right, Dad?" All eyes turned to me. My heart thudded in my chest, but I kept my expression calm. I shook my head slowly. No, Michael, I never signed them. The buyer leaned back in his chair, frowning deeply. His voice was sharp, distrustful. Are you telling me this deal isn't legal? Sarah nodded firmly. That's exactly what I'm telling you. And attempting to pass off forged documents is not only unethical, it's criminal. Michael's jaw dropped. He sputtered, his hands trembling as he tried to gather the papers. This is a mistake. She doesn't know what she's talking about. Dad, tell them you agreed. I looked at my son, the boy I raised, the man who once held my hand crossing the street. And I said nothing, because my silence said everything. The buyer shoved the chair back, standing abruptly. I'm not getting involved in this mess. Deal's off. He grabbed his briefcase and stormed out of the room. Michael's voice cracked as he chased after him. Wait, we can fix this. But the sound of the closing door echoed like a gavel striking, and just like that, Michael's perfect plan shattered. The conference room emptied fast. The buyer was gone, the deal was dead, and Sarah quietly gathered her notes, her eyes meeting mine with a small nod. It was over. Michael, though, he wasn't ready to accept it. He slammed his fist on the table, his face red, sweat on his forehead. You set me up, both of you. How could you do this to me, Dad? I'm your son. For the first time in weeks, I stood tall. My voice was steady, stronger than I thought it could be. No, Michael. You did this to yourself. He looked at me then. Really looked. And for the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. Not anger, not arrogance. Fear. Sarah slid a final paper across the table. Mr. Davis has every right to press charges, she said flatly. Forgery, fraud, attempted theft. You could be facing serious time. Michael's jaw tightened. His eyes darted from me to Sarah, searching for a lifeline. But I didn't speak. I let the silence weigh on him. Finally, Sarah stood. We'll let the court decide, she said, and with that, it was done. In the weeks that followed, the house stayed mine. Legally, publicly, undeniably mine. Michael tried calling a few times, but I didn't answer. What could he say? Sorry for stealing the roof over your head? Sorry for trampling over Mom's memory? No apology could fix what he broke. One evening, I sat on the porch as the sun dipped low, the same spot where Linda used to hum her favorite song. The roses she planted swayed gently in the breeze. For the first time in a long while, I felt peace. I hadn't just saved the house. I had kept my promise. To Linda. To myself. And as the wind rustled through the garden, I whispered softly, I kept it safe, honey. Just like I told you I would. Michael thought he could sell my house without asking, but in the end, it wasn't me who lost everything. It was him.